get a little bit further, you can check out how to give. You can check out past messages. You can check out a lot of stuff about our church, what we believe. So check out our website. It's an awesome place to check out and stay in the loop. Sign up for our digital weekly and you'll stay in the loop. So let me tell you a couple things that are coming up that you'll want to know about. Next Sunday, we are celebrating our graduates. And today is the last day to sign up, but you still have time to do that. So if you have somebody graduating really from anything, from preschool to graduate school, we would love to recognize them next Sunday. So please check that out in your weekly. There's a little QR code you can scan, and it'll walk you through what we need from you to be able to recognize graduates next Sunday. And then to celebrate, we're having a big cookout after church, and we're going to provide hot dogs and hamburgers. And then if you could bring a side dish, that would be great. I'll say this to you, it would be a great Sunday to invite somebody because it would be a great chance to be able to connect. And if you have just kind of started with us, please stay after. I know what that feels like when you go to a brand new place and you don't know anybody or you're trying to get connected, or maybe you've even been here a while, but you've only came to the service but never really connected to other people. A chance to eat is a great chance to do that, and we're a lot of fun for the most part, and there's a few people I don't know. But we'll have cornhole, and we'll have some games and kid stuff and all that kind of stuff, but check it out. At least stay for just a few minutes if you don't mind. I think that would really be great for everybody. And then on Father's Day, which is June the 15th, we're having Legend here. And his name is Nigel Anderson. He goes by Legend. The reason is because he is a hip-hop artist, to be honest with you, but he's also a preacher. He's a associate pastor over at Crossroads, I believe, a church that Eric Dingler and Marissa were going to over by ODU. And he preaches a lot of times at Grace Bible Church. In fact, I just heard him preach there, which is a large church in Virginia Beach. He has opened up for hip-hop with Lecrae and different ones, so it's amazing that we get to have him here. He's a good friend of Dave Clefman's, and that will be Pastor Dave's last Sunday, so we have a celebration that we're sending him off. No, I'm just playing. No, we want to celebrate all that Dave has done, and we're sad to see him go, but we'll be able to pray over him that Sunday. But Legend will be here. It's a great chance to invite some people to come because he's an amazing guy with an amazing message, and we look forward to having him here that day. Okay, so today, we're continuing a series called Dreams to Destiny, just in time for kind of graduation season where you think about dreams, right? Well, I don't know, when I graduated, I thought about that. But what we're talking about in this series isn't just about dreaming up something, but what is the dream that God has for you? What is the calling on your life? What is important? And not only to dream it, but how does it become a real destiny? How do you not just chase dreams, right? That's what we always say, but actually catch a few. Do you ever want to do that? I got to tell you, we're looking through the lens of the life of Joseph. And today we're going to continue, we're going to pick up in Genesis chapter 40 and verse 1. And it says this, sometime later, and that's as far as I got, sometime later, a lot of time had passed in the life of Joseph. I'm going to tell you where he was in a minute. Let me ask you this, is that your life? Some time has passed? Whatever you're doing? How well do you wait? Does anybody enjoy waiting? Right? I got to tell you, there's a lot of things. I could almost endure anything. I could almost endure any amount of pain if I didn't have to wait, right? Anybody been to the doctor? Let me ask you this. Anybody married? I had to wait on Marie. She's in the kids' church this morning. That's why I was late. Anyway, we'll leave that alone. All right. I'll have to change that second service. Edit that out, please. Got it. All right. How about fast food? Anybody have that? Right? It's not fast or food. Anyway, you get the idea, right? I don't want to mention any places that I've had to wait lately, but Dairy Queen, right? You drive through, and then they take your card, and they swipe it, and then they say, could you pull up? And you're like, absolutely not. But anyway, all right. How well do you wait? How many people, it's not so funny. You've been waiting a long time, and you're really wondering in your life, what in the world is God doing with that? Is there any purpose in the fact that God has us waiting sometimes, and it feels like sometimes we're waiting forever, and kind of what's up with that, right? That's what we want to talk about today. That's what I want to talk to you about today. What is God doing in the wait? So let me talk to you a little bit about Joseph. Some time had passed in Joseph's life. Can I tell you how much time had passed? 10 years. That's a long time. especially for the condition that he was in. We learned in the first message that Joseph was born in Israel, but Israel wasn't a nation at that point. It was just a family, and a very dysfunctional one at that. But kind of the summary of his life is that he had brothers that were older than him, and his father was married to 2 women, which is never advisable. But he was married to the favorite wife, and his brothers were jealous of him, and he didn't understand that. And so his father gave him a special coat that he wore, and they definitely didn't appreciate that. It showed favoritism. And then he shared with them the dream. That's how we're going to kind of start. The dream that God had for him, which was that you all bow down to me. How do you think that went over, right? Well, we kind of know, right? It went over like a lead balloon. And so what happened was they wanted to kill their brother. That's how dysfunctional they were. Anybody have a family that dysfunctional? We're not going to ask, right? But they were. But then they decided not. They just sold him into slavery. And that's kind of where we pick up the story of Joseph. And we talked a little bit about saying, hey, that Joseph, that was actually the dream that he had was from God. It was a real dream, but the wrong timing. That timing is super important. We're going to get around to that today. And then he was sold into slavery. But when he got there, it was actually providence in a way. I mean, that means God was at work. And he was sold to Potiphar, who was the captain of Pharaoh's guard, meaning he's a prominent person. He was over all the secret service. And on Potiphar's estate, it's believed that they had the king's prison there. So he was over a lot of things. And because Joseph found favor from God, and because Joseph was faithful to serving even in those conditions, he made it where he was in charge of all of Potiphar's household. That's huge. I just want to point out today, you know what that meant? He was a few steps from Pharaoh. Now, I don't know that Pharaoh ever came to Potiphar's house, but a lot of really important people did, right? I mean, Joseph was at the top of his game when then, not only that, but he was well built and good looking and all that kind of stuff. And Mrs. Potiphar liked him and propositioned him. And he refused. And she falsely accused him, and so her husband threw him into the king's prison. Can you imagine what that might be like? He's the warden. He's in charge of everything. Imagine what his life went down, and that's where we covered last week. Now he's in prison. Things went from bad to worse. But even in prison, he had favor, and that's what we talked about last week a little bit, that he had favor even at the end, and God was there with him. But even so, the conditions are bad. But here's what I want you to understand. Now 10 years has passed. Some time had passed. Where is God? What is the point, right? I think that's where you've been praying, right? God, why am I waiting so long? Anybody saying that? God, where are you at in this? And if that's what you've been praying, can I tell you something? I believe that today might just be the answer to your prayers. That we're about to show what the waiting is all about, because maybe you never realized it even had a purpose. All right, let me finish the thought. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt is Pharaoh, offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with the 2 officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. That's Potiphar. In the same prison where Joseph was confined. It's believed to be an estate, so not in his actual house. It was meaning that he had a prison somewhere on the estate, which was probably like a dungeon, like really bad. It's where you put people that you don't want to ever come out again, right? Go there and think a little bit. And that's where Joseph was. So I want to explain the story of the cupbearer and the baker. Understanding that Pharaoh being the emperor of really the world, I mean, because at that point, Egypt was really the biggest empire in the world. He was the most powerful person on the earth. So to be their baker, one, you had to be good at what you did, right? Because he liked to eat. And the cupbearer. But the idea of the cupbearer is that the cupbearer would eat the food before you did, and then they would see if you die, right? The cupbearer. So then it wouldn't kill the king. But that meant that he had to be there whenever you ate, which is kind of a big deal, right? I mean, so this isn't just a small job. This is like a cabinet position where you go, hey, this guy can give advice. He has the ear of Pharaoh, and he has to like that guy. And by the way, in those days, don't think of it like human rights. There was none. whatever Pharaoh wants, that's what he'll do. And it didn't matter, morality, whatever. And so you had to please the king. But this guy was with him, and the baker. And so if you wanted to kill the Pharaoh, and this is what it's believed, we don't know for sure, but if you wanted to kill Pharaoh, like assassinate him with poison, the two people that you would have work for you, you know who they would be? The cupbearer and the baker. And so he threw them in prison because there was a belief that maybe there was like a conspiracy that somebody was going to kill him. So he's like, throw them in there and I'll figure it out. And while they were in prison, they had a dream and it bothered them. And so Joseph came, and because he was in charge of the prison, basically, even though he was a prisoner himself, he came and he said, basically, can I pray for you? And they said, yeah, we need interpretation of these dreams. And so Joseph interpreted their dream. And the way the dreams went was this, and you can read it for yourself, but basically the cupbearer's dream was, I dream about 3 vines that budded these grapes, and then I squeezed the grape juice or the wine into the cup of Pharaoh. It's a weird dream. And he says the 3 vines represent 3 days, and that in 3 days, you'll be back doing your regular job, that he'll exonerate you. And they were like, man, that's great. So then the baker's like, he's feeling pretty good. He's like, well, let me tell you about my dream because I want the same result, right? And he said, hey, I dreamed about that I had bread that was on my head in a hat or something, and the birds came by and ate the bread. And Joseph said, well, your dream is this, is that in 3 days the king will impale you and the birds will come and eat your flesh like the bread. That's terrible, right? I mean, like, so kind of good for the cupbearer, terrible for the baker, so be careful what you ask for, right? Knowing the future. And by the way, in 3 days, exactly what he said happened. But Joseph says this, but when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to the Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. Can you imagine how Joseph felt after being in Egypt for 10 years? We don't know how long he was in jail versus in slavery, like he was a slave first and then in Potiphar's house and then in jail. It doesn't matter. You know why? Because I got to tell you, when you're in a deep, dark hole like Joseph was in, you don't know time anymore. Right? They don't tell you. There's no calendar there. And you know how long it takes for time deprivation to happen? You can study it for yourself if people have been tortured or people that have been in these kind of places. You lose time right away. You have no idea how much time has passed. This is 10 years. And for the first time in 10 years after being in Potiphar's house, he has hope. How does that feel? Right? Okay. But then it says this, the cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. That's a little painful, isn't it? For us, it reads like a footnote. For him, it reads like not knowing, because the cupbearer didn't say that to him. He didn't send him word saying, hey, I'm going to forget you. You know what it was like? It was like, I did this kindness for you. You said you would remember me. And then when you left, I wonder how long it took him to know, right? Some of you guys have been in here, right? That I thought it was going to turn out, and then a day passed, and that's okay, right? A week passed, that's okay. A month passed, I'm getting a little concerned, and now years have passed. I can hear the prayer, because it's the same prayers I have to God, right? Why the false hope? Why did you let me have false hope? It would have been better had I had no hope, right? In fact, we talked about this last week in a book, and I think it really parallels Joseph well. That's why I mentioned it. It's called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. It makes the top of the chart on any leadership or anybody that wants to read about survival. Viktor Frankl survived Nazi concentration camp. In fact, he survived Auschwitz, and he wrote about it from a psychiatrist's viewpoint. It's an amazing book. But one of the things he talks about is hyper intention, where you actually you look at something and you fixate on a specific rigid goal when you're in a place like that, and as long as it comes true, you're good. But when you look at a finish line and then you get there, it's like running a marathon and only getting to the end of the marathon and they go, keep running. Well, how far? I don't know. Keep running. And you go, I have nothing left. That's where he's at. So maybe that's where you are. What I want to ask you today is this. Why did God let that happen? It's clear that he did. What is God doing with the false hope? And today I want to tell you what he does. Maybe you didn't think there was an answer, but there is. Okay. We're going to flip over to chapter 41. We're about to flip the chapter in Joseph's life. It's about to change everything. And here's what changes. Chapter 41 and verse 1. When 2 full years had passed, I don't want to move past that too quick. I just want to make sure you know, what does that feel like when you have no idea? You have no idea how long you've been there or how long you will be there. Yeah. Pharaoh had a dream. That's a foreshadowing of what we want to talk about. But before we get into what the dream was and all the lessons, I want to talk a little bit today about God's timing, right? Because it's definitely not ours. Do you agree with that? God's timing is perfect. And what I want to point out today is this, is that God's divine delays are perfect. So I want to give you a couple takeaways, and we'll start with this, okay? The first thing is this. God's divine delays position us for the big moment. You can see it if you're reading it, right? Joseph was able to interpret dreams, and Pharaoh had a dream. You can see the positioning, right? But what was the reason for the wait? Can I tell you? Because there was. I remember several years ago when I say several, 20 years ago, when I went through a really, really hard time. They are the kind of things you don't forget. And I remember listening on the radio every now and then. I would listen to Chuck Swindoll, and I remember him saying this over and over, and it really just, I was irritated by it, but I realized it's a profound point. He said this, he said, God has never used anyone that he hasn't crushed first. The greater the calling, the deeper the crush. That's pain, isn't it? Nobody wants to hear that, right? Not crush me. I want to be blessed. No, crushed. Do you want to know why? Do you want to know what this is all about? Maybe I could give it in the physical realm. Do you know how you build a muscle? You crush it. If you didn't know, you go to the gym and you work out, and then your arms feel like you can't move them, right? And you go back and you do it again, and you get heavier. And unless you feel the crush, right, you're not really building anything, right? Are you starting to understand? Maybe you don't. Right? Maybe I don't. Crushing. We would consider it humiliation. God considers it humbling. It's very important to the process. And we're going to get to it. Let me give you a couple verses you can write down if you want to. Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 34, it says this. It won't be on the screen. He mocks proud mockers, but he gives grace to the humble. Proverbs 18:10 says, before his downfall, a man's heart is proud, but humility comes before honor. Oh, can I pause here? Because you might be going, what in the world did Joseph do? I want you to go back and think to the first message, and if you didn't, you can go back and you can read it for yourself. See how Joseph approached his brothers wearing that stupid robe, right? And sharing that dream in a way that wasn't really mature, right? Isaiah 66:2, has not my hand made all these things? And so they came into the beginning, declares the Lord. This is the one I esteem, he who is humble and contrite in spirit and trembles at my word. James 4:6 says, but he gives more grace. That is why the scripture says God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And 1 Peter 5:6, humble yourself, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, and he will lift you up in due time. It's God's process. You get that, right? It's always God's process. The crushing process of God, can I say it a different way? The humbling process of God. I use the word crushing because that's how it feels to us. For God, he's helping us with humility. It is the magnet of God. It is how God will bless us, but it's very important why. We're going to get to why, but I want to make sure you know this isn't just Joseph's life. This is how God always operates. All the great ones. Let me give you a couple examples. Noah. Back in the beginning of the book of Genesis, you can read about his account that between the time that God called Noah to build the ark and the time that he actually built it and the rains came and flooded the earth and he saved him, you know how long it took? 100 years. While everybody made fun of him, what's all this time? Right? Can I tell you, Abraham, when God called him out of the land of the Chaldeans and go to a promised land, he got him to the promised land, but he promised him a son at age 75, which was almost impossible, right? Do you know how long it took between the time that God told him he would have a son and the time that he actually had it? 25 years. He was 100 years old when he had his son. Can I tell you, in the life of Moses, the greatest leader this world has ever known, when the children of Israel were enslaved and they had been crying out for 400 years, that Moses spent 40 years in Midian. Sorry, I was thinking about where I'm at. I'm just playing. Right? 40 years on the backside of a desert doing nothing. He was 80 years old when he showed up at the burning bush. And you know what his response was at the burning bush? You can't possibly mean me. I want someone that's contrite in spirit, or else I can't use them. And we're going to get into why that is, because maybe you don't think God is doing anything in the wait, but you could not be more wrong. He is working when you can't see it. It's a bigger work than you can imagine. I tell you, David, he was anointed king at age 13. He killed the giant at a few years later, and then he spent 20 years between the time he was anointed king and the time he had the nation of Israel fully under his reign. He spent half of it in the hills of Adullam in obscurity. Don't tell me it's not God's process. Every leader, right? The Apostle Paul, from the time he was called to be the great apostle by Jesus on the road to Damascus, and the time he became the great apostle Paul, he lived 10 years in obscurity that nobody talks about, right? There's nothing to talk about. Nobody even knows what he did during that time. Other than this, God creates his champion in that process, humbling them so he can exalt them and uplift them in due time. So let me tell you, after Pharaoh's dream, the cupbearer remembered Joseph. Isn't that nice? I know somebody that can. I kind of forgot about him, right? But now he remembers him. And after they remembered him, here's what happens. Verse 14. So Pharaoh sent to Joseph. He sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. And when he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before Pharaoh. Can you think about how that felt for Joseph for a second? He's been there for more than 10 years. He's been enslaved in a prison. What do you think it felt like to come out for the first time? Right? You know what? I think we think people get yard time. I don't think they did. I think it's one of those, if you've been in a dungeon that long, you can't even see when you go outside because of the light. At least that's what I've read, right? What happens when you look in the mirror after being enslaved and in prison for over 10 years? What do you look like when you look in the mirror? Some of you guys, you look in the mirror this morning, you're like, well, who is that, right? Right. But if you've been there, right, you haven't even seen yourself. And now, all right, what thoughts run through your head? What thoughts run through your head about people, right? Especially, you know what I always think when he came before them and he sees the cupbearer? What's he thinking there, right? I mean, how does the cupbearer respond? Because they're right there, right? And the cupbearer is the one that told him, and it's like, hey, man, I'm really sorry. I forgot about you, right? I mean, like, dude, it's been 2 years. Which in prison time, that would be eternity, right? Verse 15 says, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard it said that you hear a dream and you can interpret it. This right here, I would say that's the opportunity of a lifetime, is it not? Right? It's like if you're a tech guy and Elon Musk says, hey, I want to hear your idea, right? It's like, I mean, you want me to do this, right? It's an opportunity. Can I tell you the irony of this? It's interesting. Sharing a dream got him into slavery and later into prison. Interpreting one will get him out. Can I show you Joseph's response? Because I do believe it's the biggest deal today. Joseph's response is the biggest deal. Here's how he responds. I cannot do it. If I could give a little bit of advice, Joseph, that's not what you want to say, right? Don't let that be the first words that come out of your mouth to Pharaoh, who has no reason to have you here other than the cupbearer. I'm sure the cupbearer cringed. But God will give Pharaoh the answers he desires. Do you understand now what the time was for? Maybe you don't get it. We're going to explain it. Look at his demeanor. He's humble and he's confident. He's got nothing to prove. There's literally nothing you could do to this man. He's been through it all, right? It's like, what are you going to do to me, right? But that gives him confidence. But it's not arrogance. This is important. He doesn't make a list of demands. He doesn't ask for a whole bunch of things. He's honest about what it is. Pharaoh shares his dream. Can I tell you what the dream was? You can read about it for yourself. It's it's kind of funny in a way. He dreams and it disturbed him, which I can understand, but he dreamed that 7 cows came out of the Nile River that were fat. And then 7 cows that were skinny came out of the Nile River. And then the 7 skinny cows ate the fat cows. Super weird. Then he had another dream where there was a stalk of grain and all the heads of the grains were there, and there were 7 ones that were healthy, and there were 7 ones that were thin and scorched, and the thin scorched ones ate the healthy ones. And that was the dream. And Joseph, because he prayed, could interpret it. He said, this is the dream. It both mean the same thing. It means that there'll be 7 years of abundance, the likes of which you haven't had, where you're going to have all kinds of crops. And by the way, Egypt was the breadbasket of the world for a long, long time. It has to do with the Nile River and how it was fertile. Anyway, they changed that when man gets involved, they kind of messed that up over there. Anyway, you can read that for yourself, what they did to the Nile River later. But at that time, Egypt was the breadbasket of the world. It was even that during the Roman Empire, believe it or not. But anyway, they were going to have a huge amount of crops. But then after the 7 good years, there's going to be a famine, and the famine will be so bad that everybody will forget all the good years. It was told twice because it means that God has firmly decided this. That's why I gave you 2 dreams. And then the other part of the dream is that it's firmly decided and it will come quickly. So you need to do something about it. And what I recommend you do is that during the good years, store up as much as you possibly can, because let me tell you something, the whole world is going to have, not just Egypt, and you will become unbelievably wealthy when you're the only one that has food. Pharaoh liked it so much that Joseph did this. Joseph interpreted the dream. Can I give you another takeaway? Number 2. God's divine delays prepare us to receive the blessing. This is the reason for the wait. This is the reason for the crushing. Reason for the false hope. The reason is so he would say, I can't, but God can. You get that, right? You know why that's so difficult, right? So that his eyes would be on God. You know what he learned in the false hope of going to Potiphar's house? Because it's the same result, right? It's like, hey, I was in slavery, then I got here, and then I was elevated, then I was torn back down, and then I had to go through it again. Then there's another 2 years of it, and you're wondering, what is all this? Did I tell you how you build a muscle, right? You tear it down, and then you build it up. You tear it down, and you build it up. And God's been tearing him down and building him up so that he would learn something. Repetition deepens the impression. Is that right? Anybody going through pain, you get it, right? Pain deepens the impression, does it not? And he's trying to teach Joseph something that all he can see is the pain. But what he's doing is he's saying, I want your eyes on me, Joseph, not your ego. When I gave you the dream, see how you responded. It was all ego, Joseph. You gave it, you didn't even care how you presented it. You shared it so sloppy with your brothers. Didn't even realize how they felt or nothing. I don't want you to do it from ego. And I don't want you dependent on circumstances. If I had blessed you in Potiphar's house, do you know what would have happened? You would have thought it's all about the miracle, wouldn't you? And you would have got your eyes off of God. And I don't want just one miracle. I am the God of miracles, but I don't want you dependent on circumstances. I want you dependent on me. Maybe somebody need to hear that today. Without the process, though, you won't know what to do when God blesses you. That's why the impression had to be so deep. Because you think you're most vulnerable when you're in the prison, but you're most vulnerable to forget God. You know when it is? In prosperity. That's a fact. Joseph went through something, and I don't think he's going to forget. You see, what God's trying to teach us is this. It takes God's power and God's presence to fulfill God's calling. God blessed Joseph. I'll give you a couple of examples. Verse 38, Pharaoh asked Joseph, he asked, can we find anyone like this man, one whom the Spirit of God is on? Pharaoh is a pagan king and recognizes in Joseph the Spirit of God. Verse 39 and 40, he says, you shall be in charge of my palace, and my people are to submit to you in your orders. Only in respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Did you just hear that? From the prison to the palace, and now you're in charge of the entire world. You know who might have just cringed a little bit, who was the captain of the guard? He was probably just standing right over there. Potiphar, right? And Mrs. Potiphar, do you think a chill just went up their spine a little bit to go, do you know how powerful that is? That means I'm not deciding anything. You will decide in this world for everyone who eats and who doesn't. You're the most powerful person in existence, right? You know, what I want you to see, though, God had been preparing Joseph for more than a decade. It's not something easily seen, but I think somebody that's in a holding pattern, you need to see it, because you might think God not doing anything in the situation you're in, but he has been preparing him. Do you realize that when he went to Potiphar's house, that he moved up and he was second in command only to Potiphar and his household? This includes dignitaries. This includes prominent people in Egypt. This may have even included the prison then, because everything was under Potiphar's command. And it said Potiphar did nothing because Joseph was in charge of everything. And Joseph had learned how to be second. That's huge. You know what he could have done? Because it seems to be meaningless. And I think that's what you think in your life. That's why I brought up the book, Man's Search for Meaning, because Viktor Frankl has one thing right, that meaning will make it go a long ways. But when you feel like nothing has meaning, he goes, people just die. People do all kinds of atrocities to each other. Even the Jews did atrocities to each other because they thought nothing mattered anymore. but God is watching. God has a point. And Joseph was faithful in the small things. Are you starting to see that? In the prison, which is even worse, right? How after I'm falsely accused and I've got all this stress on me, nothing matters now. But they put him in charge of the prison. He didn't have to do it though, right? But he was in charge of the prison, learning how to be in charge during difficult times. God had been preparing him. You see it? God has been preparing you in whatever it is that you're in for what's next. Maybe you needed to hear that. I'm not explaining your pain away. I'm just telling you that God doesn't waste it. That's all I'm saying, right? For 10 years, he's been second, and now he's ready to lead. But here's what I want to tell you. Had he not been faithful, he wouldn't be ready. You see it? That's why in Matthew 25, what does it say? If you've been faithful in the small things, I'll make you master over many things. In Joseph's case, he made him master over the entire world. Okay. And Pharaoh understood it, because if it weren't for Joseph, Pharaoh would have starved too. You get it? It goes on to say that Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh. 13 years had passed. That's a big chunk of his life, right? And the warning that I have for you is more people forget God in prosperity than any other time. But Joseph didn't. You want to know why? Because he had been crushed and then built up and crushed and built up. And he had learned to keep his eyes on God, whatever the circumstance. By the way, Joseph got to work right away, and he remembered that God had a plan. It goes on to say this, verse 57, and all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph, because the famine was severe everywhere. That's powerful, right? They all came to him because, in fact, it says that when they came and they didn't know what to do, when the famine struck, they didn't know what to do, and Pharaoh just pointed to them and said, whatever Joseph says. Pharaoh also gave Joseph a wife, a prominent wife, so that he married somebody that was prominent so he would be considered great. And he got to have a family. You know, I think for 13 years, he thought, I will never get out of this place, right? I'll never have a family. And he had 2 sons. I want to read for you about his sons. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh. And said, it is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. The second son's name is Ephraim, and he said, it is because God has made me faithful in the land of my suffering. It doesn't sound like he was trying to get a grudge. There's no knowledge of him ever trying to get Potiphar or Mrs. Potiphar. Could have, but didn't. And it sounds to me like he's wanting to let go of the past. Are you seeing this? That's part of the reason for the whole process, right? That he's not holding on to ego. He's not holding on to past hurts. He's focused on what God is doing. There's one last thing I want to make sure we get today, and it's so important. That God's divine delays equips us for what's beyond what we think is the big moment. Beyond. I want to show you what's beyond. It's more than what he could have thought of, but it prepared him for it. As we flip to the next chapter that we're going to cover next week, it says this, then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. Now it's not theory, right? What will you do, Joseph? Next week, we're going to talk about God's plan, that God's plan is bigger than you can imagine. It was not for one generation. It was to change the whole world. And you have no idea what hangs in the balance. It isn't just the world. It's beyond that. It's generation after generation. It's the salvation of all of mankind. We'll talk about that next week. Can I tell you in Ephesians it says that God's plan, he says, my plan, I will do more than you can dream or think or even ask. You have no idea what's important. But before we can get to next week, there's something we have to embrace today. You know what that is? God's timing is perfect. God's divine delays are perfect. And the question is, will you embrace God's timing wherever you're at? Can I say it another way? Will you serve God faithfully? You know what I learned from the life of Joseph as I looked at it? There's only one thing that matters: being faithful. That's it. Not understanding, not knowing how long it'll be, not knowing what God's going to do or telling God what to do, but it's being faithful right where you are. My question is this: will you serve God right where you are? Will you embrace God's timing? Can I pray for you today? Let's stand for prayer. Father, we take a moment to thank you for this incredible story that you shared from the life of Joseph. I wonder, Lord, how would our story read? I don't think mine would read like Joseph's. But I don't think that's the point. It's not about perfection. It's about that we could change if we want to. Even Viktor Frankl, you gave him that enlightenment in his book, Lord, Man's Search for Meaning, that anybody could change if they want to. That even people that were in charge of Nazi concentration camps, some of them made changes later in their life. So I think somebody has hope today, no matter how much despair that they have because of someone else, or how much despair that they have caused, that at the foot of Jesus and the blood of Jesus Christ and the resurrection power of your one and only Son could redeem them and give them life. But I think what we need to hear today, Lord, is that you have a purpose and a plan for all. And there's somebody that's been struggling because they basically would do anything except for wait on you. They have no idea what you're doing in the transition, but you're working. You're working to set the stage for what they need. You've been working on them and they can't even see it. And I believe the most important thing we'll ever do is humble ourselves before the mighty hand of God. Realizing that you know more than us. Maybe somebody could do that today. That if we would only humble ourselves, it doesn't matter which side of the equation we're on, whether we've messed up really bad or somebody messed us up really bad. Lord, you could put us back together again, and not only that, but you've been working the entire time for a plan beyond anything we can dream or think or ask. But our part is if we're not faithful, we won't be ready when it comes. So maybe somebody needs a change of heart today. Not a change of circumstance. I know that's what they want. I know what we all want, Lord. We want to flip the page to the end and see what happens at the end of Joseph's life, to hurry up and get there. But if we do, it will only be a dream. It will never be a destiny. Because the truth is, the greatest work you'll ever do is in us, not the external. It's got nothing to do with what is happening outside. Lord, I believe there's somebody in existential despair today. It's a despair that feels like they could never get out. And they wonder why you allowed it. But I believe you allowed it because they need to see the need for you. Some of them have never known you, so I pray, Lord, that they know your one and only Son, Jesus, that died for them and rose from the dead and is offering them a relationship with God to be restored, and they'll reach out for that today. I also pray, Lord, because I believe there's followers of Jesus that enter into existential despair. They're at the precipice and don't know what to do because they can't imagine that you're there, but you are. And that you'll reach through even hell for them to pull them out and to bring about good. But the good part is, Lord, you have a plan in all of it. And if they would only reach out to you, they'll find something more important than any circumstance, that you will always be with them. And that you have a plan beyond anything we can dream or think or ask. So today, God, we surrender to you. And we'll give you all the honor and glory and praise in Jesus' name. Amen. Guys, if you need prayer, we'll be here after the service. For everybody else, God bless you. Have a great week.